Welcome to this tutorial video, continuing the look at Sonic Recursion. Sonic Recursion is a term for slightly more elaborate kind of feedback loop process. So what I'm going to be doing now is giving you all the walkthrough in terms of how to set this up for yourself. As you can see here, I've got three sources here. As you can see here, I've got three channels. The first is the sources channel. That will have the audio file. It could be a MIDI channel. It could be anything. I have the effects return, and the effects return is going to be set up in such a way that it is the kind of the hub around which all of the different feedback sources will be sent around the system. Finally, I'm just going to use one effects channel for the time being, and that effects channel is labeled feedback or feedback source. So sources will contain an audio file. Effects return will be the hub for the returning of all, as like a subgroup for all of the effects. We'll be coming back to there. And then feedback source will essentially be what we send our source to, and then we will return it to the effects return. So at this stage, it's really important that pretty much for every channel, put a limiter on it. It's going to be the safest thing that you can do. You can save your ears, your headphones, your speakers, and anything else. I'd recommend -3 dB as a useful starting point. Though sometimes you might need to go up to -6. Place a limiter on the effects channel as well, again, -3. And I also place one on the master bus. This is one of those where the -6 works. So I'm going to use a particular sample. You can use anything you want to use. I'm going to use this one that's labeled Carbon. And I made this sound a long time ago with a Native Instruments synth called Carbon, and I actually use it quite a lot. I really like the way it sounds. Now the routing is really important here because we're going to send signal via the sends from the sources channel into the feedback source. And then the feedback source is going to then be sent to the FX return. We achieve recursion by being able to send the send from FX return to feedback source and vice versa. So I'd recommend using sends only in this mode. You only do this if you don't want to hear the original signal to be sent to the master bus. So for this instance, essentially we're going to control the level via the send A in this instance. So we're going to route the feedback source to FX return. We're going to switch the channel into monitor in. And we are then going to send the signal coming in at FX return back to the feedback source. And at this point, this is how we achieve a level of recursion. So only the FX return will be going to the master bus. Playing the sample, we can't hear anything unless we take up the A send level. And remember that when you're using sends only, you get that purple bar graph for the meter. That's how you know you're using sends only. So the effects you hear on Carbon on the sample are actually on the sample. We're not using any other effects here. So now at this point, you need to decide what sort of effect you want to use here. In the intro video, I was using the pedal effect. So I've reduced the dry wet and bringing up the level a little bit. Yeah, that's why you need a limiter. What you feel are the kind of the right levels being shifted around the system. sort of start to work with it. For pedal, it's very straightforward. You can cut or boost the 3-band EQ. Sub makes quite a bit of difference in terms of replacing something that gets lost in the general processing. So you can hear by trying the 3 different algorithms, we get a variety of responses. One of the things that I like to use is the Resonator. I think it's a sorely underappreciated Ableton device, and it gives us a lot of interesting opportunities. Going to use a utility just to boost the level initially whilst we have the pedal turned off, and as you can see, this will get you feedback as well. So frequency will be used to either sort of dampen the frequencies down or to boost it. I tend to like this type of harmonic or chord type sort of sound. So +7 introduces a 5th. So you can hear we introduce new sort of melodic tones. I'm going to shorten the loop length here so that the sound triggers a lot more quickly. And I'm also going to use the transient shaper in 16ths just to get more of a pulse. +10 gives you a flattened 7th. 15 gives you a minor 10th or minor 3rd up an octave. And my favorite one, the 14, which gives you a 9th. So as you can hear, it's quite an intense sound. Sometimes what you'll need to use are sort of other devices to sort of create more difference. The frequency shifter, again, is another device that tends to not get as much attention as, say, some of the other devices. And again, it's really useful in this sort of situation. We'll hear it on its own. So just adjusting the rate of the LFO and the amount of the LFO, and then put it onto a more random noise-shaped LFO so that it's able to move around a lot more. The ring modulator is really good. And you can hear this kind of shifting of like 2 frequencies rising and falling. The rate is really good because now it brings out the randomness of the LFO. Now give it the resonator and it starts to behave differently again. So what I'm doing now is just reducing the amount of feedback going to recurring or recursive feedback going to A. And the actual level is controlled from the sources channel. because again, depending on the amplitude level, you will get varying degrees of intensity. Introducing the pedal sound. Remember, this is still the same carbon sample. So I'm going to make another effects channel, or at least a couple of them, which we'll try and use. So one of the effects that we can use here is delay. And again, the limiter for safe practice, -3 again. This is going to be on send B. So the sources channel is only going to take care of sending the signal to the feedback source A. Once that feedback source is returned to the effects return, then that acts as the subgroup, as a hub within which we direct all of the other sort of additional effect sources like delays and so on. So we can send something from sources if we want to, but we can also send it from the effects return. When you start up an effects channel, they are by default disabled, but you can enable them if you need them. And again, this will offer us another level of recursion, being able to send the signal both into itself, back to the effects return, and then back from the effects return to the effects channel. So here we go. Send some of the original source material to the delay. Make sure it's completely wet. And a little bit of dampening. Now we send some of the delay from the return channel back to itself. I'm just reducing the feedback source down so that it doesn't come screaming in. Here, just moving things around to sort of try and find where potential sort of interesting sounds might lie. So we can enable the sends. Remember that they are, you can right click and then enable send. So what's happening here is the feedback source is being, as well as going to the effects return, is being sent to the delay, which in turn is being sent back to the effects return, wherein again the delay signal from B on the effects return is being sent to the delay. This in essence is what it means to be recursive. So just enabling the rest of the sends on the delay channel so that then goes back to the feedback source. So we've got a little bit more of a loop that's taking place there. And slowly the sound is taking shape. And of course, we can also enable the channel so that it sends it back onto itself as well. increasing the gain, increasing the bass, bringing up the frequencies, changing the algorithm. By bringing the LFO rate down and the amount of the LFO, we can see the extent of the modulation that's actually available to us. Obviously, a system like this is quite complex to manage, given just a single mouse as the main sort of interface element. Changing the frequency shifter so that it reflects a time base, a quantized time base. Okay, so I'm going to revert back to the original file length and turn off the transient shaping and the shorter loop. So that gives us a bit more space, so that we can appreciate the points when it's the sample, and then at other points when we're just listening to the process. So now I've turned the sample off, and what we're just hearing is whatever energy is kind of left in the system where the various channels and effects are feeding back on each other and essentially maintaining momentum. So the thing that once you've kind of got to this point when you no longer need the sample because you've kind of excited the system enough, there is always the potential to lose energy because you've sort of reduced the general excitation that's going on. So you can see this in the levels on the FX return channel. You can see that they've slightly dropped. I love the sound of ring modulators, especially when it comes out of that sort of slightly up and down of the two frequencies, and then it stabilizes into a feedback tone. So it's really important to kind of appreciate that this is kind of more than just the sort of a feedback. What we're trying to do here is to essentially control and generate some sort of interesting sort of pieces from controlling the levels going into the different channels. So one of the things I like to use is the LFO from Max for Live. Because I haven't got enough mouse pointers or a controller, I'm having to control everything with a single pointing source, the mouse. So this LFO is great because it gives me 8 it's sort of elements that can be mapped to a single LFO. So again, we can control the range that this LFO has on a particular control. So this is mapping the frequency for the resonator, and also map the decay. So you can see these values, the minimum and maximum, as a kind of an offset. So you can concentrate it within a particular area, and it seems to work somewhere between 50 to 75%. Again, the frequency of the shifter. And again, just positioning it around that 11 o'clock to 1 1 o'clock range, the amount of the LFO, and then finally the rate. Change the wave shape and the rate of the LFO. Now it makes a lot of sense. So using the triangle, so it's a bit more of a slopey up and down rather than the curved sine wave. On the front of the LFO, you tend to see the very first parameter that you've mapped, and this is the frequency for the resonator. To get to the rest, you'll need to click the little disclosure box. So that leaves us 3 more possible parameters that we can map. And one of those that I like to do are basically we can automate the send levels. So here, automating the send level A from the delay channel going into the feedback source. Likewise, mapping the feedback source being sent to the delay. We start to hear pitches that are forming through all of this. Now, having mapped some of these parameters, there are still some elements or some space whereby you can manipulate some parts of this manually. So now the playhead is no longer running. So when the playhead isn't running, the LFO actually will stop, but the feedback system will actually continue. Now, as we've got this far, it would be really good to maybe try a different audio source and see what that's like. So this one is a reverbed clap. A single clap is used to excite the system, and then the rest of the time we leave it to essentially sort of evolve itself, assisted by the LFO tool. And then for us, you know, we can still explore the manual elements. And the manual elements, things like the EQ on the pedal, the different types of algorithms, even things like gain. The sub makes a difference. It's quite an intense piece. You know, it's quite an intense approach, really. And those of you that have made it to the video this far, well done. It's really not a straightforward task, sitting there for, 20 minutes or so. Okay, so I think we'll end that there. It will just carry on. This video, my aim with this video is to show you this recursive process and recursive practice, and it's a way of, you can generate kind of soundscape, sound pieces. Some of them might well be quite offensive for some people, some might not. It depends, where your tolerance levels are. But the thing is that you can take sample sources and essentially transform them. You can transform them into lots of different ways. We know we can use filters, and you can do saturation, and you can do all of this other stuff, and we can stick some kind of multifaceted plugin on it. But most of the time it still remains, this still sounds like a clap, this still sounds like a pad. Whereas this process will essentially destroy it in hopefully a constructive way. And if you do follow this approach, everyone who follows this approach will come up with different sorts of things. Each of us will hear different things, different sorts of artifacts within the audio files that we are manipulating. And you should really just add it to your sort of list of skill sets and the sorts of processes that you can deploy when you need them to kind of do something different. This isn't about existing in a particular sort of genre or anything else like that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've liked it. Please like and subscribe. I make lots of these sorts of videos. Generally, they come out every Monday. Like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what sorts of things that you might actually like to hear. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye now.